You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here on the phone with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
That's right. I'm calling this one in.
Well, so we got to give people some context for this. I called you and
Surely
said...
not.
No, don't.
Surely not. Everybody in this country knows that you're supposed to be isolated or isolating.
Yes, and that's true, but that's not why you're on the phone.
Oh, why am I on the phone?
Well, because I had said that while the crisis was going on, that I wanted to do a podcast that addressed the crisis, and yet I know that is going to get overwhelming for some people, so I still wanted to release other content that we have that is more generically psychological. So I wanted to do 2 a week, and you said, well, the only way I'm doing that is if I call it in because I can't stand to be in your presence twice a week.
That's not a literal quotation, but it's an apt interpretation.
So, but actually, we were doing this at the last moment, and I asked you if you would do it. You were gracious enough to take time out of your family time to...
Well, did you not know that Gracious is my middle name?
I thought it was Grace. I didn't know it was Gracious.
Grace for short, yeah. Graceful, yeah.
So what I wanted to talk about was that last week when we put out our coronavirus issue, the first one on being able to stay calm, I actually got feedback. We actually had a lot of people interact with that show, more than any other show that we've ever done. And one of the things that people were actually interested in was what are the effects of social isolation. So we know that social isolation has profound physiological effects. We know that human beings in isolation actually go insane, start to show psychotic symptoms. So psychotic meaning an inability to perceive reality accurately after just 96 hours of isolation. After a week, anybody put in complete isolation would be displaying psychotic symptoms. So isolation does have a profound impact on the human body. So we wanted to talk about that.
Okay.
So one of the first things so first off, we're going to assume that most people, now some people are isolated. They live alone. They don't have anybody else that they're interacting with. Most people have somebody that they're interacting with, a significant other or a child. In a lot of ways, that kind of isolation can be even worse. Would you?
And why do you say that? How do you think it would be worse?
Well, I think that being in an isolated situation, so being trapped at home with your immediate family, whether that is a significant other, a spouse, or your children, can actually induce a tremendous amount of stress that might not otherwise be in your life.
Well, yeah, because you have relationship issues that come into play when you're in a small group that is isolated from the rest of their contacts. So if your family's used to going to work and going to school and going out in the community, and now they have to stay in the house with you, there are going to be challenges that come up because they're not used to being around you or you each other all the time. They're used to having other outlets to bleed off stress or tension or preoccupation or whatever might be the issue.
Right.
So you have to think about that in terms of how do I approach this for minimum distress and maximum peacefulness in the household community.
So I think that for me, I see this in 2 categories. So there are the people who are isolated with family. There are issues associated with that. Then there are people who are isolated more alone, and I think there are issues more of a physiological potential nature that are associated with that. So we wanted to kind of talk about both of those things.
Yeah, but people that are isolated alone, I think there's a greater risk if they have any kind of mental health issues, or physiological issues. If you are alone, if you have a fever and nobody can bring you a cup of soup, nobody can bring you a glass of water, nobody can fix you a meal or do your laundry, if you sweat through your sheets and things, that's a more compounded seriousness to the issue of being alone than just not being able to go outside and talk to your neighbors.
Absolutely.
Both of them are real concerns.
Right.
People are social animals, and so we need to see and have contact with people in some domain, some way. And you can watch a lot of television, or you can listen to the radio or Amazon Music or something like that, and that will help you some, but you still need human contact. And so that's one of the both blessings and curses of social media. If you have social media, you can get in touch with your friends, and you can use FaceTime or some other similar app domain to talk face-to-face with somebody that's not in the room with you, and that helps a little bit too. So you can call your friends, you can check in with them, you can play cards with them. I saw a thing today on my social media of two neighbors that were playing Battleship with each other using binoculars in the picture window in their front room. And so somebody would make a play, and they would put like C4, and then the other one would take his down and look at it and put back D7, and they just move around trying to find each other's battleships.
That is so cool. That is so outside the box.
Yeah, well, that's the whole issue. How do you get outside the box?
And I think
boxed in your house.
That's right. And when we talk about the social media aspect, and I think that this is going to also include the amount of time that we spend watching Netflix or some other screen. So screens in general, they do a lot of research on screens and the amount of time that we are connected to interacting with screens. And one of the things that they found is that the amount of time that we interact with the screen actually correlates with higher levels of depression. And so then there was an article that I read a couple of weeks ago that said, the threat of higher levels of depression associated with screens was overblown. They did a study and they didn't find this same correlation. So I've actually really looked into this, and basically the way it looks is that studies that find correlation between screens and higher levels of depression are associated with 6 or more hours viewing a screen. Yeah. Studies that show that there isn't a correlation are looking at 4 or less hours.
Well, what if you're already depressed?
Well, exactly. So if you're already depressed and you're looking at a screen, but what I'm trying to say to people is make sure that you're monitoring how much time you're looking at the screen. It is.
Well, we were talking last week about homeschooling or having kids at home for school since all the schools are shut down, and I've been doing some more thinking about that, and I think I would be less concerned as a parent with a school-age child in my home that they were doing specific assigned lessons. Like your American History Chapter 12 for this week, answer the 4 questions at the end of the chapter, write an essay. I wouldn't be as concerned about whether or not my kids were doing that, because at the end of this period of time, this national stress time of coronavirus and the lockdown, it's more important that your children have good mental health than that they completed the 4 questions at the end of chapter 12.
Right.
And so if they have 35 math problems to do, I'm not going to stress out forcing them to do 35 math problems. I may encourage them to do them. I may try to create that as an experience rather than an assignment. But if they are not receptive to that, I'm not going to rant and rave and scream and yell and lock them in their room, those kinds of things as punishments for misbehavior or non-performance. I think it's much more important whenever this is over for our kids to go back to school, regular school, with good mental health and good grounded self-images than that they go back after having been browbeat by people who aren't naturally teachers.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you haven't spent time teaching junior high or high school kids, 30 in a classroom, it's kind of hard to keep their attention and keep them disciplined and focused. And if you've got a single mother at home who's trying to fix dinner, do laundry, and supervise her kids' assignments, I think that's a pretty overwhelming expectation for everyone.
So it's going to be more important because we talked last week also about the need for people to be aware that this situation is traumatic for children.
Yes, absolutely.
And what we don't want to do is traumatize them because of the scariness of the situation, then traumatize them because of their
Our
schooling,
reactions.
right? And
Yeah.
then traumatize them again when they have to get reintegrated into the educational system. So we have to be able to practice some compassion and self-care for everyone, including our children, but also
That's
for
right.
ourselves. I know at
Yeah.
the university where I teach, we're teaching online for the balance of this semester, and they are saying to us, be very aware that these individuals are having a very difficult time, and they're at home with their families, and they're trying to stay in school. So, we're not telling you don't have some academic rigor, but we're also trying to ask you to understand that everybody is having a difficult time. Let's try and encourage as much of these individuals to complete this semester successfully. So don't be overly aggressively hard on them.
Well, academic rigor is an intellectual concept that they talk about for high school and college level students. I think that's a little different than elementary or middle school
Absolutely.
at home. Although there are lessons that can be learned and should be learned and can be introduced within the confines of the household. And I'm not talking about the more traditional homeschooling families that have set classroom hours and assignments and books and things to work from at home and a history of doing it that way. I'm talking about people that have been going to school their whole lives, going out to school, who suddenly are now quarantined at home and can't get there. You might have 2 or 3 kids, and they might be at different grade levels or studying different things. And you may have a parent, for instance, my high school kid who was taking calculus, I couldn't help him at all. I never took calculus. I don't know calculus. And if they would come to me with a problem about calculus, I would have to distract them with some other issue. Let's paint your bedroom. Let's figure this out. Let's figure out the geometry of how to paint your bedroom. Because we got a week off. Let's get it done. That's all right. Go ahead.
Oh, so, this idea of what are we going to do with the kids, I think then our message is try and consider some out-of-the-box thinking. Try and make it fun, also to help them to encourage them to use some critical thinking skills, but don't be overly pedantic and you must complete this many sheets in the workbook by this date or else there's going to be hell to pay.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Now, beyond what we're talking about with the kids, one of the things that I'm really sensitive to is people's circadian rhythms are going to get thrown all out of balance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a huge thing. So your circadian rhythm is controlled by the amount of light that you're exposed to. If we're all inside, we're going to be exposed to less light. We're going to be exposed to artificial light. People's internal clocks are going to get all out of whack. And that's going to cause people...
That's a significant contributing factor. Right. I don't think it's the sole factor involved here, though. I think stress has something to do with your circadian rhythm.
For sure.
I think your diet and exercise has something to do. And if you're staying at home for a few days and you're used to getting out and going to work, what are you doing about watching your diet? You get bored, you eat. You get stressed, you eat, and you're not eating well. You're not eating regularly, and then you have trouble sleeping, or you wake up in the middle of the night. So you get up and watch television because most of us have 24/7 access to our screens, so we're watching something. And then we're not following a disciplined schedule about going to bed and getting up that we normally follow, and that gets us off rhythm.
And we're interacting more with those screens, which then correlates with a higher potential for depression. But you know this, and nobody else has any reason to know this. My gym is in my house, so I have my own gym. And everybody else in my family all goes to a gym, so they pay to go to a gym. You know whose gym isn't closed? My gym. Do you know how many people I'm not even joking. We had to distribute keys to my children this weekend and set up a schedule. There's a rotating schedule for people to come to my house and work out because the gyms are closed.
And they're not supposed to be interacting with each other.
Well, I mean, we're all family, so I don't know whether
Depends
that's.
on who else you're running into.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. I don't know if that's completely above board or not, but the point is that you have to get out of the box thinking about how you're going to. If you have a good exercise regime, that's great. That's going to be profoundly impacted during this time of social distancing.
Well, yeah, and if you don't have a gym, what do? You can do sit-ups and stretching exercises and push-ups, but you can also get a can of vegetables and do curls or something, or a gallon of paint if you have one. A gallon of milk weighs between 8 and 12 pounds, so you could do curls with that in one hand and curls with it in the other hand. Do repetitions. It's not the volume of weight. It's the repetitions and the form.
That's right.
So if you work on that, then you can still get some exercise and help yourself stay healthier and help stay mentally focused.
But I am really concerned about the nutrition that people are going to be engaged in, that's going to go down. People are going to want to eat comfort food. They're going to want to eat high caloric foods. And that's going to
absolutely.
That's going to be bad. And then if you add to
alcohol.
that alcohol,
yeah.
And then, add to that the fact that all the gyms are closed. So I want to definitely say to people, make sure that you're mindful of that. If you're not getting enough light, then think about a light box. So light boxes are light systems that are greater than 10,000 lumens. They have that on Amazon. And that actually can really increase the amount of light that's falling on your retinas and really help you with those circadian rhythms. So people need to be mindful of taking care of themselves during this time. You want to take care of the children. You also want to take care of yourself. They say when you're on an airplane, right, that when the oxygen masks drop, you're supposed to put on your mask first, because if you're incapacitated, then it doesn't matter what happens. Your child's going to be in trouble. So you have to take care of yourself first. And I think it's really easy for us in a situation like this to think about how many people we have to take care of, and giving to make sure that other people are being taken care of, which is great. Altruism is fantastic. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, that's going to be a problem.
So we've talked about diet, we've talked about exercise, we've talked about routine. We haven't talked about the fact that churches are closed as well.
Yeah.
And so if you have a spiritual grounding or a spiritual focus that you aren't able to practice in your habituated way, what helps you avoid the stress when you're isolated, when you are alone? And I know, for instance, my church is having services over Zoom. The priest is there, and they go through the communion process, and they give a little sermon, but nobody's in the church. It's just the priest. But the parishioners can attend online. There also are books of meditations and prayers and thoughts that you can read. There are meditation exercises that you can do to get yourself grounded and spiritually focused. And I would really recommend that people that are isolating through choice or not through choice give some thought to meditation and spiritual grounding, spiritual practices while they're alone.
Absolutely.
And as a family, to do the same thing. Right. Sit around, if you're Christian, read the Bible. If you're Jewish, read the Torah. Read some of the literature of your faith foundation and discuss it as a family.
That is such a great point. I don't know. I was going to say I feel lucky. I guess it's not necessarily luck in the age of the internet, but our church services are online, so we can access those. But, for people who either their church isn't technologically advanced enough, they don't have an online service, or, people are not watching those things or don't feel connected in that way, again, it's just the out-of-the-box thinking. What can you do to enhance your sense of spiritual connection?
And if it's not church-related, then there are still things that you can do that are meditative and centering that can help you get grounded and quiet down your anxiety and help you structure your time in a less stressful way.
Right. I mean, we all know that if you are of a specific religious persuasion. If you're Christian, that you can read the Bible. If you're Muslim, you can read the Quran. If you're Jewish, you can read the Torah. But I would encourage people in this time when you have all of this extra time, try and do something out of the box. If you're a Christian, read some Buddhist literature. If you're a Muslim, pick up a Christian Bible and look at it. Take the opportunity to get to know something about another faith and see what you think about that. I don't think that anybody can ever be harmed by paying attention to more religious works.
I would agree with that, and I would remind you that the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians are all what are called people of the book, and they, especially referencing the Old Testament, there's so much overlap and similarity in a lot of their written materials that even if you were a stranger to that particular religion, you could find something that you could recognize and relate to.
Exactly.
If you started reading.
We're all children of Abraham. And I can really, really geek out on that subject, so that isn't a conversation for this podcast. But I agree. I think that it's really enhancing to me when I sit down and read the Quran. Now, I don't have a copy of the Torah, so I've never actually read the Torah, but I really feel more connected to my faith when I expose myself to the ideas of another faith.
Yeah. I suspect you can find copies online.
Oh, I'm sure you can find anything online, right, since Al Gore built the internets?
That's right.
Yeah. So to land the plane and just really bring this home for people, I think that for me, what I'm really hearing us talk about is that during this period, we want to encourage people to not just become vegetables. Don't just sit on a couch and watch Netflix and break the internets. Start thinking outside the box and do something. Think about, how am I going to keep on a good diet? How am I going to get some exercise? How am I going to engage my children in a way that is going to be life enhancing for them? So trying to think about these things, because the truth is we're only in day 8 of the 15 days.
I think that's correct.
Yeah. And so
get your kids to shine their shoes, get them to iron a shirt, get them to do a load of laundry, get them to fix homemade biscuits. And there are all kinds of things that you can get them to do that'll take time and attention and focus if you stop and think about it.
Right. And the thing that I'm concerned about is the 15 days is just a reevaluation period. I mean, just because the 15 days ends, and I think that's March 30th or something, just because the 15 days ends doesn't mean that we're going to lift all these social isolation regulations. I mean, that's going to be a period of reevaluation.
But also, Michael, so many of us who have a level of economic security are not going to be as totally stressed out by this experience as people that don't have that. People that are worried about losing their job or paying their rent or getting a test to see if they have this virus. The stress levels are going to be exponentially higher with every day that passes. And so what we're trying to talk about is ways that you can structure your time and spend your time that may reduce some of that stress, may contain it somewhat, and help you focus it on you can't deal with reality as you wish it was. You have to deal with reality as it actually is. And so you have to look at each day, and like they say in AA, one day at a time. What food do I have in the refrigerator? What food do I have in the cabinet? What can I make out of this? It's like the Apollo 13 movie. Pull things together and say, here's a whole bunch of stuff. What can you do with this?
Absolutely.
And with the goal being to not stress out, not fall apart, not get depressed, not get mentally unbalanced. Just stay calm, stay stable, keep moving ahead.
And I think that's always going to be our take home, is that, being panicked is not doing anybody any good. We've all got to try and remain calm and try and remain focused on what the goal is. The goal is to reduce the stress that's on the healthcare system and to try and enhance the ability of the medical community to address the real issues that are going to be presented as the pandemic continues. So in doing that, we can stay calm and we can try and think outside the box and we can try and do all of the things that we're talking about.